do something inside and try to do more things. And really appreciate my teammates try to help me a lot.
Watching the Indiana Fever play basketball without Caitlin Clark on the floor is not only a miserable task for fans, but also a painful study in how one player can elevate the entire dynamic of a team and how her absence exposes every single weakness, both individually and collectively. And while basketball is ultimately a team game, the Fever's dependence on Clark has become so glaring that when she is out, everything collapses into a disorganized, uninspired, and fundamentally broken product. And this was especially clear in this particular game, where the interior defense was nothing short of atrocious, giving up more than 50 points in the paint, which is almost unfathomable at the professional level because that kind of interior collapse suggests a lack of effort, positioning, communication, and pride. And Aaliyah Boston, who is supposed to be the defensive anchor of the franchise, looked like a stationary cone under the rim, offering little resistance, looking slow to react, and ultimately showing how badly the Fever need a leader who demands accountability on both ends of the floor. And that leader, right now, is Caitlin Clark, even though she's a rookie, because when she is there, at least there is energy, pace, direction, and the threat of offensive brilliance that forces the team to play with urgency. But without her, it was as if the Fever collectively decided they had no reason to compete, as if Clark's absence meant automatic surrender, and against the youngest team in the WNBA, a roster full of rookies, raw talent, and players still finding their place in the league, this game was supposed to be winnable. It was supposed to be one of those rare opportunities to grab a victory and build momentum, but instead, the Fever looked lifeless, careless, and boring to the point of being unwatchable, which brings us back to the big question people keep asking. Why are so many new fans tuning into the WNBA right now? And specifically, why are Indiana Fever games getting so much attention? And the truth, which many analysts and critics don't want to admit, is that it's not politics, it's not media conspiracies, it's not about identity narratives people are spinning, it's simply Caitlin Clark herself, because she plays in a way that is captivating, reminiscent of NBA-style basketball, with deep threes, flashy passes, fearless drives, and a confidence that elevates the entertainment value. And when you take her out of the picture, the product reverts to the stereotypical criticisms fans have long held against the WNBA: stale offensive sets, repetitive plays, poor spacing, lack of adjustments, and an inability to improvise when the first option breaks down. And this particular game was the purest example of that, because instead of using Aaliyah Boston as the focal point, instead of feeding her the ball inside, instead of running pick and rolls that forced defenses into difficult rotations, the Fever guards spent possession after possession, dribbling aimlessly, forcing bad shots, ignoring mismatches, and wasting the shot clock, which is basketball malpractice at this level. And when you look at Boston's stat line, just 5 shot attempts in an entire game, you can see how criminally underutilized she was, especially given the fact that her greatest success comes when paired with Clark in pick-and-roll situations, because Clark draws 2 defenders on the perimeter, leaving Boston with easy lanes. But without Clark, Boston is ignored, invisible, left stranded as her teammates look her off and instead settle for contested jumpers or reckless drives that end in turnovers. And much of this blame has to fall on Kelsey Mitchell, who, despite her scoring ability, played one of the most inefficient and stubborn games imaginable, going 4 for 16 from the field, putting her head down, missing open teammates, and failing to realize that her role in Clark's absence should not be to force offense, but to facilitate and take advantage of the defensive attention she commands. Yet time and time again, when Boston set a screen and rolled hard to the basket, Mitchell refused to make the pass, preferring instead to settle for low-percentage looks, which is not only selfish, but also destructive to the rhythm and confidence of her frontcourt star. And Sydney Colson, who is supposed to bring veteran poise, looked completely lost, dribbling aimlessly, spinning in circles, and ultimately airballing a wide-open 3 as the shot clock expired, a sequence that summed up the entire offense: confused, stagnant, and devoid of creativity. And it's shocking because head coach Stephanie White should be hammering the simplest adjustment imaginable: run a high pick and roll with Mitchell and Boston every single possession until the defense proves it can stop it, because at least that gives Boston touches, creates inside-outside balance, and forces the defense to collapse. But instead, the Fever looked like a team without a plan, and when you add that to their interior defensive struggles, it becomes clear why they had no control of the game, never looked comfortable, and never seized the momentum even against a team full of rookies. And this brings us to the deeper truth. Caitlin Clark doesn't just add scoring, she adds structure, she adds spacing, she adds confidence, and she makes her teammates better by creating plays that otherwise would never exist. And her absence exposed that the Fever don't have another guard capable of replicating even a fraction of that vision. And while no one expects another Caitlin Clark to exist on this roster, the gap between what she provides and what her teammates fail to do is so massive that it makes the entire WNBA discourse clear. People are watching the league because of her, because when she is there, the product is exciting, unpredictable, and worthy of attention. But without her, it reverts to the very criticisms that have plagued it for decades, which explains why so many detractors and skeptics look at games like this and dismiss the entire league, because they aren't given the joy, the spectacle, the artistry that Clark provides, and instead, they're given a lifeless shell of basketball that feels like it belongs in a scrimmage gym, not a professional stage. And this is where the Fever need to look in the mirror, because yes, Clark is their superstar. Yes, she is the franchise. Yes, she is the reason fans are packing arenas and tuning in at record numbers. But this is still a professional basketball team, and to roll over like this without her is unacceptable, because every team in sports eventually has to survive stretches without its best player, and the great teams, the well-coached teams, the disciplined teams, still find ways to win ugly games through defense, hustle, and execution. And yet the Fever, instead of rising to the challenge, played uninspired. And worse, they showed no urgency to fix the very issues that have plagued them all season long, namely interior defense and offensive spacing. And if Boston is going to be the all-star caliber big she was drafted to be, she has to demand the ball, she has to set harder screens, she has to seal her defender more aggressively, and she has to hold her guards accountable when they ignore her, because right now, she looks passive, and passivity on the interior translates to opponents feasting in the paint. And this game was evidence of that, as rookie players were cutting backdoor, grabbing offensive rebounds, finishing uncontested layups, and running circles around Boston and the Fever's front line. And this isn't even about Clark's absence, because even when she's there, interior defense has been their Achilles heel all season. It's just that her offensive brilliance usually masks it long enough to keep them competitive, but strip that away, and all you see is the rot underneath. A team without defensive toughness, without a backup plan, without the kind of collective grit that defines true contenders. And for Stephanie White, this should be the wake-up call, because if she cannot develop a system that functions at least minimally without Clark, the Fever will continue to be exposed, and worse, they risk burning out their rookie superstar by making her carry everything night after night, which is unsustainable. And ultimately, games like this prove something that critics of the WNBA have long argued, but supporters have been hesitant to admit. The league desperately needs its superstars, not just for talent, but for entertainment, for pacing, for identity, and Caitlin Clark is that once-in-a-generation figure who doesn't just elevate her team, but elevates the league itself, because she brings something rare, something magnetic, something reminiscent of NBA legends, who could single-handedly dictate not just the scoreboard, but the very feel of the game. And when you watch the Fever without her, you realize just how bleak and uninspired WNBA basketball can be without that spark, which is why the media circus around her isn't artificial. It isn't manufactured, it's earned, it's real, and it's because she has that it factor. And until her teammates learn to rise to her level, the Fever will continue to be one of the most frustrating paradoxes in sports. A team with a generational star who can't function without her, and a roster full of players who have yet to realize that winning starts with defense, ball movement, and trust, not selfish isolations, wasted possessions, and lazy rotations. And if the Fever can't learn that lesson soon, then every game without Caitlin Clark will look exactly like this one. Boring, discouraging, and a reminder that in the WNBA, as in all sports, greatness doesn't just
Lee, you were able to make a couple three-pointers, but then also, score quite a few times in the paint. Just what worked well for you offensively tonight?
I feel
Watching this game was one of the clearest reminders of how deeply flawed the Indiana Fever still are without Caitlin Clark, because from the opening minutes you could see Natasha Howard getting completely worked in the paint by Shakira Austin, who was basically going to work possession after possession, carving out space and scoring almost effortlessly. And the troubling part was not just that Austin was effective, but that she was uncontested, like the Fever interior defense had absolutely no pride in making life difficult for her. And it wasn't just Austin, because once Kia Stokes or even players like Kiki Irving got touches around the rim, it was the same exact story. Uncontested layups, deep seals, easy finishes, and the frustrating part is that this has been the Fever's issue all season long, an inability to hold their ground defensively in the paint. And when you look at the roster, you have to start asking why someone like Michaela Timpson is not getting minutes, because she was literally drafted and scouted as one of the best interior defenders in college, a player with raw talent, yes, but also with the physicality and defensive instincts that this team is clearly lacking, and yet the coaching staff refuses to give her a chance while they keep running the same veterans who are getting exposed repeatedly, which makes no sense if you claim to be building a culture and developing young talent. The only player who looked like she had even a shred of defensive fire in this game was Dear Dantas, who when she checked in at least showed some willingness to get in people's grills, bump cutters, deny easy entry passes, and actually make opposing players work. But outside of her, the entire defensive effort looked like statues with their hands up, cones that Austin and company were simply maneuvering around. And it begs the question of accountability, because defense is about effort as much as scheme. And when you see repeated possessions where Aaliyah Boston is essentially conceding position in the paint and allowing herself to be treated like a smaller player despite her 6 feet 5 inches frame and all-star pedigree, it is impossible not to feel disappointed, because Boston is supposed to be the anchor, the one player you can rely on to set the tone, and instead she often looks passive, letting players dance around her instead of asserting herself physically. And this isn't about attacking Boston's talent, because offensively she remains a beast with touch, footwork, and the ability to dominate out of the pick and roll. But defensively, she has consistently been exposed on the block since her rookie year, which is why the Fever keep bleeding points in the paint. And until she decides to use her size with more force and urgency, this weakness will define the team. Offensively, without Clark, things were even uglier, because there was no rhythm, no creativity, no flow, just empty possessions where the ball swung around the perimeter before someone like Natasha Howard settled for a mid-range floater or push shot that had no business being taken. And the problem with Howard is not that she isn't skilled, but that her role is completely misunderstood. Because when Clark is pushing the tempo and collapsing defenses, Howard thrives by running the floor, catching in transition and finishing at the rim, but when you ask her to go one-on